cacti and succulents. They've evolved over time to withstand incredible periods of drought. And as a result, we can find them growing in some of the most inhospitable places on Earth. Whether that be Ariocarpus kotschoubeyanus growing in the silt pans of Mexico, or Brachycereus nesioticus in the lava flows of the Galapagos Islands, or indeed Lithops gracilidelineata growing in the quartz fields of Namibia. These are all plants that have adapted through some modification or other to be able to withstand extended periods without water. And yet, when we bring them into our care, into cultivation, there are always questions that arise. How often should I water them? How deeply should I water them? When should I water them? And if we get the answers to those questions wrong, it can result in diseased plants and often dead plants. And so today, I'm going to present to you 7 rules for how to water your plants, and along the way, hopefully dispel a couple of myths that have perpetuated in the watering of cacti and succulents. As always, it's backed by a bit of science. So hopefully you're going to watch this video, understand the processes behind watering, come away a little bit better informed, and the end result will be happier plants and a happier collector. So let's get stuck right in and learn everything there is to know about watering cacti and succulents. I'm not going to stand here and blow smoke up your ass and tell you you've got to follow these 7 rules to the letter or all your plants are going to die. Absolutely not, right? Different plants have got different levels of tolerance to making mistakes. I've got 2 plants here to compare for you. This here, this is Haworthia argenteomaculosa, and this is a seedling of Pseudolithos midgiotinus. Now, the Haworthia, this guy really doesn't care when it comes to the rules of watering. I water it all throughout the year, whether it's dormant or not. Don't pay much attention whatsoever to what it needs. Now, this is a plant, when its watering conditions aren't met as it needs, what it'll do is it'll shed its roots, I suppose to stop it from uptaking more water than it needs. But then it just grows them back again. Now, this plant may not have been grown optimally, I don't know, but it looks pretty happy. I've had it for about 5 years from seed. Doesn't seem to care what I do when it comes to watering. On the other hand, Pseudolithos midgiotinus, this is a species of plant notoriously finicky when it comes to water. You only need to look at it so much the wrong way when you're holding a watering can, and it'll dissolve into a puddle of rot. And so, following these rules, probably a little bit more important for a guy like this. So, the best thing you can do is know your plants, experiment with them a little bit, and you'll find out which plants are happy as rule breakers and which aren't going to see it out. Now, the first real consideration we have to account for when it comes to watering our plants, plant dormancy. What's dormancy? What are you talking about? Well, essentially, at different times of year, plants go to sleep. Their metabolism slows right down, their growth rate grinds to a halt. Now, different plants will go dormant for different reasons, but when we're talking about cacti and succulents, almost always it's to do with their access to moisture in habitat. Essentially, they go dormant during the dry season, enables them to withstand drought. Now, different plants go dormant at different times of year. It just depends on when it rains in habitat. For example, I've got this Cyphostemma juttae, a South African plant, and it's winter time here in Sydney, and as you can see, this is a dormant plant. Normally it would have a huge crown of leaves emerging from the top, but it's shed those as a deciduous pachycol plant, and it's now sleeping. Can I water this over the winter? Yes, I will. I can give it a bit of water, a few splashes here and there, just to keep the roots going. On the other hand, currently growing, these Conophytum pellucidum. These are a plant that go dormant over the summertime. Now, how do I know if they're active or dormant? Well, in the case of these Conophytums, you might be able to see these old dried up leaves. In the summertime, these leaves, the plant bodies, will shrivel up. They'll dry completely and they'll protect the new growth that sits inside them. A way to withstand the sun's harsh rays. Fantastic adaptation. Now, how do we know if our plant grows actively in the summer or the winter time? Well, I've put together a bit of a table for you. You can see it on your screen right now. It's not exhaustive, and as always, there are exceptions. So if you're unsure, look up the particular plant that you're growing and find out what it needs. Now you can see that last column, special considerations. We've got Lithops. You can see here, this is a Lithops leslii, and they have a very particular watering routine that they need. This is actually a species that is a little bit more forgiving than most Lithops, but many of them can only really be watered through the springtime and the autumn. So bear that in mind if you're growing Lithops, have quite specific cultivation requirements. What does it mean if a plant's dormant? Well, it just means it needs significantly less water. In some instances, depending on the species, it needs no water at all. Find out what your plant needs in terms of dormancy. There's plenty of resources online, and modify your watering accordingly. Now, how often should we be watering our plants? There's no real simple answer to that question. We have a goal, and that goal is to ensure that our plants have got ready access to moisture when they're in active growth without ever sitting in saturated soils for too long. But really, it's going to be dependent on three things. Number one, our climate. Number two, our soil mix. And number three, the type of pots that we're growing in. All of these will impact how quickly our soil dries out and how often we need to water. If you're growing your plants in somewhere that's sunny, dry, naturally your soil will dry out more quickly than anyone growing their plants at somewhere more humid or cloudy or miserable. And if you're growing your plants indoors, you've really got to pay attention to the artificial microclimate that you've created around your plants, because all bets are off then. Now, of course, in terms of soil mix, if you're growing your plants in something gritty and heavily inorganic, it's going to dry out more quickly than if you're using bagged soils, more organic soils, more moisture retentive soils. And of course, lastly, plastic pots, they retain moisture a lot better than something like an unglazed terracotta pot, which is porous and allows moisture to escape out the sides of the pot. Now, you combine those three factors and soil mixes can dry out vastly different rates. Here in Sydney in summertime, I grow plants in plastic pots using very inorganic, gritty mix, and I water my plants usually twice a week. In the wintertime, we've got a little bit less evaporation, so I'll water them once a week. You need to know your circumstances, you need to know your own growing conditions and figure out how often you need to water. Now, this is a fantastic moment to dispel our first myth. Often you see people talk about online, if you've got mushrooms growing in your pots, doesn't that mean you're watering too often? Isn't your soil too moisture retentive? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I love seeing mushrooms in my soil, not because it necessarily comments on the moisture levels, because it's instead reflective of the fact that you've created a really healthy soil biota. Your soil is enabling life to thrive within it. So if you see mushrooms come up, don't think, oh my God, I need to hold back watering. Just give yourself a pat on the back and say, well done. I've got a really healthy soil mix going. Anyway, that's watering frequency. Let's move on. Now, how deeply should we be watering our plants? The answer in every instance is as deep as you possibly can. Why? Because deep watering promotes root growth, and plants with deep roots are ultimately more vigorous, they grow happier and healthier. When it comes to deep watering, we've got a few options. We can water from above or from below. I'm going to demonstrate both methods today and tell you a little bit about the drawbacks and advantages of each. If you've got a large collection and they're outdoors, top watering is probably the easiest way. It saves a lot of time. I use a wand just like this one. Now, how do we do it? We want to make sure that our plants are getting completely soaked through. So, taking, for example, this Yungasocereus inquisiviensis, we're just going to water it until I'm satisfied that this pot is completely drenched. You can see water running out of the drainage holes there. This has been well watered. Now, if you're growing your plants indoors, or you've got a smaller collection, it can be beneficial to water them from below. Again, ensuring that our pot gets completely soaked through. For illustrative purposes, I've got a vase here, and this is a winter growing plant. This is called Athona herrii, beautiful cordiciform plant, just a seedling. What we're going to do, just going to stick that pot into the vase. You can see up to the neck of the pot. I'm going to keep that there until I can see water coming up around the base of the plant. This can be a more time-consuming method, but one way of doing it, if you just get a large tray of water, fill it up, put your plants into it in pots, leave them there for a little while, you can come back, they'll have soaked up a lot of the water. So that's one way of saving time. Now, again, we can see the water dripping out the base of the pot there. So this has been well watered. It's a fantastic opportunity to raise our second myth of the day, and that is that sensitive plants should be watered with a teaspoon or a tablespoon of water, like this. Let's take these Conophytums, pour that in there. Now, in this instance, I've got such a gritty soil that it's coming through, but in most cases, that's not going to be sufficient at all. Absolutely not. Certainly not for a larger plant in a deeper pot. Leave the teaspoons and the tablespoons to the kitchen and water your plants properly, because that sort of watering is only going to promote shallow root growth, sad, weak, unhealthy plants, and ultimately probably dead plants. Don't use spoons, please. Now, the next rule goes without saying, and that is ensuring that your pots have got adequate drainage. Essentially, that just means make sure that they've got a drainage hole in the base. They're not sitting in a dish or a tray or something else that will hold water around the roots. But this is also a really good opportunity to address a myth, and that is that idea that by putting a layer of rocks at the bottom of a pot will actually assist in drainage. Now, this myth has perpetuated despite it being a long way from the truth. It's quite complex, the science behind this, but if you want to look up more, you can look up the idea of a perched water table. And what that means essentially is that a shallow amount of soil will retain more water than a deeper amount of soil. Doesn't seem to make sense, but I can illustrate it with this sponge, which I'm going to wet for you now. As you can imagine, a pot with a layer of gravel, the soil is actually shallower compared to the pot that's completely filled with soil. Now, imagine this is our thin layer of soil above a layer of gravel, holding a certain amount of moisture. However, if we were to take that gravel out and the depth of the pot and the soil was to increase, have a look at what happens to the moisture. It all drains away. So that's why we shouldn't be using rocks at the bottom of our pots to aid drainage. All plants need to breathe, and our cacti and succulents are no different. Where these plants differ from everything else though, is they do their breathing at night time in a process called crassulaceous acid metabolism, or CAM for short. Now, without getting too technical for you, essentially what happens is tiny pores, what are called stomata, they open up on the plant and enable there to be an exchange of gases, release of moisture, essential processes in terms of growth. But it's a process that is triggered by dropping temperatures. And so, if you live in a part of the world where overnight temperatures can sometimes stay very high, then these plants can enter into temporary dormancy. We're talking, depending on the species, over 25 or 30 degrees Celsius perhaps, very warm temperatures. If your plants are undergoing those sorts of overnight temperatures, it is imperative that you do not water, because these plants have no way of expelling any excess water, and the end result almost invariably is going to be rot. This is a crucial one to know about, and probably not one that a lot of people have necessarily heard about, perhaps because it doesn't impact all growers everywhere. So if you have hot nights, avoid watering, allow temperatures to go down. Sometimes that might mean the entire summertime, depending on where you live. Now, this last rule is probably one that we don't want to have to think about, but dead plants are an inevitability in any collection. So the least we can do is try to learn from our mistakes and rectify them for next time. Right now, I've got a whole shelf of cacti and caudiciform plants exposed to the elements. It's winter, like I said, and they're getting plenty of rain throughout their dormancy. The idea is trying to find out which of these plants are hardy enough to survive in those conditions. And for the most part, they're thriving. However, take a look at this guy. This is a seedling of Stenocereus eruca, the Mexican creeping devil cactus. Really fascinating species that kind of crawls across the desert floor. And as you can see, it's got a pretty nasty fungal infection. This plant is not going to make it. Now, it's been out there too. What have I learned? Don't let these plants sit in the weather over the winter time. Now, every dead plant, therefore, becomes a lesson that we can learn. Now, I hope that you've learned a little bit now about how to water your plants. You're a little bit more confident in growing them. If you've got any questions, please do hit me up in the comments, or you can follow me on Instagram at bayou.brothers. That's it for today. I'll catch you next time. Happy growing.